Union Pacific built a locomotive more powerful than the Big Boy, designed to be its successor. It burned jet fuel, produced 8,500 horsepower, and was supposed to revolutionize railroading forever. So why did it vanish without a trace? Before we continue with the video, if you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My wife said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories about old trains like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these videos matter. Please subscribe to our channel and let's keep these old trains' legacies alive. The Big Boy ruled American railroads like no other machine. Between 1941 and 1944, Union Pacific unleashed these 1.2 million-pound giants onto the Wasatch grades, conquering mountain passes that had defeated lesser engines. With 135,375 pounds of tractive effort and over 6,000 horsepower, the Big Boy became the measuring stick for raw power, the ultimate expression of steam technology pushed to its absolute limits. But by 1952, Union Pacific's engineers knew something the public didn't. The age of steam was ending, and they needed a replacement that could match the Big Boy's legendary hauling capacity while embracing modern technology. The answer came not from traditional diesel-electric power, but from an unexpected source: the jet engine. General Electric partnered with Union Pacific to create something unprecedented, a locomotive powered by gas turbine technology, the same principle that propelled aircraft through the sky. The result was a machine that dwarfed even the Big Boy in certain measurements. These turbine-electric locomotives, designated as GTELs, could produce a staggering 8,500 horsepower, nearly 40% more than the Big Boy's peak output. Union Pacific ordered them in waves. First came 10 units in 1952, then 15 more in 1954, and finally the massive third generation in 1958, 30 behemoths that stretched 83 feet long and weighed 850,000 pounds. These weren't experimental curiosities, they were production locomotives, assigned to the same mountain grades where Big Boys had once reigned supreme, hauling freight across Wyoming and Utah with a fury that made the ground shake. For a brief moment, it seemed Union Pacific had found the future. The turbines burned bunker C fuel oil, a cheap heavy residue left over from refining processes. They required less maintenance than steam locomotives and could run longer between servicing than early diesels. Railroad executives watched with satisfaction as these mechanical marvels conquered the same routes that had made the Big Boy famous, doing it with fewer crew members and modern reliability. Yet today, not a single gas turbine-electric locomotive operates anywhere in North America. No crowds gather to watch a restored G-TEL thunder down the tracks. No children build model versions in their basements. While Big Boy number 4014 tours the country as a living legend, drawing thousands of spectators, the turbines have been erased from popular memory as thoroughly as if they never existed. If these machines were so powerful, so modern, and so promising, how did they disappear so completely? The answer lies not in what they could do, but in what the world became while they were doing it. In the years following World War II, turbine technology represented the cutting edge of power generation. Jet engines had transformed military aviation, and engineers across industries wondered what else this revolutionary technology could accomplish. For railroads facing the twilight of steam power, turbines offered a tantalizing middle ground between the proven muscle of steam and the emerging promise of diesel-electric locomotives. The concept was elegant in its simplicity. A gas turbine engine, similar to those used in aircraft, would spin at extremely high speeds, generating rotational energy. This energy would drive a massive electrical generator, which in turn would power electric traction motors connected to the driving wheels. Unlike steam locomotives that required constant stoking and water stops, or early diesels that struggled with reliability, turbines promised continuous high-output power with minimal complexity. General Electric had already proven the concept abroad. Swiss Federal Railways operated turbine locomotives successfully through the Alps. The British experimented with turbine power on their western region lines. But Union Pacific's vision was grander. They didn't want a replacement for medium-duty engines. They wanted something that could shoulder the heaviest freight trains in America, the kind of brutal work that had made the big boy necessary in the first place. The first-generation GTELs, delivered starting in 1952, established the blueprint. Each unit housed a 4,500 horsepower turbine engine mounted in a massive car body. The turbine itself spun at 5,700 revolutions per minute, a screaming whine compared to the rhythmic chuff of steam pistons. That rotational energy fed into generators that produced enough electricity to power 8 traction motors, 2 per driving axle. What made the turbines especially attractive was their fuel. Bunker C oil, also called residual fuel oil, was the thick, tar-like substance left after refining lighter petroleum products. In the 1950s, refineries practically gave it away. While diesel locomotives burned expensive diesel fuel and steam engines required quality coal, the turbines could consume the cheapest fossil fuel available, sometimes costing 60% less per gallon than diesel. Union Pacific's leadership saw the economics clearly. One GTL could replace 2 or even 3 diesel units on heavy freight runs. The fuel was dirt cheap. Maintenance intervals stretched longer than steam engines ever managed. And the power output exceeded anything else on American rails, allowing the railroad to move more tonnage with fewer locomotives. By 1958, when the third-generation turbines rolled out of General Electric's Erie, Pennsylvania plant, Union Pacific operated the largest fleet of gas turbine locomotives in the world. These weren't experiments anymore. They were the presumed future, the machines that would carry American railroading into the modern age. But the future had other plans. The numbers stamped on the Union Pacific GTLs were not marketing fiction. They were verified performance figures that left even seasoned engineers shaking their heads. The third-generation turbines, designated as UP Class 8500, delivered a continuous output of 8,500 horsepower, a figure that put them in a category by themselves among American locomotives. To understand what this meant in practical terms, consider the comparison. A big boy, working at peak efficiency on a good day with experienced crew in optimal conditions, could sustain roughly 6,000 to 6,200 horsepower. The Allegheny, that forgotten giant from Chesapeake in Ohio, topped out around 7,600 horsepower. The early diesel locomotives that were beginning to replace steam could manage perhaps 1,500 to 2,400 horsepower per unit. The GTL stood alone. A single turbine locomotive could pull what required multiple diesel units or a pair of big boys in double-header configuration. Union Pacific assigned them to the Sherman Hill grade west of Cheyenne, Wyoming, where steep climbs and heavy tonnage had always demanded the most powerful locomotives available. The turbines conquered these grades with an ease that seemed almost casual, but raw horsepower told only part of the story. The turbines also delivered exceptional tractive effort, the actual pulling force applied to move a train. While they couldn't match the big boys' starting tractive effort of 135,375 pounds, they didn't need to. The electric traction motors provided smooth, controllable power across a wide speed range. A turbine could start a heavy train and then accelerate it to sustained speeds that steam engines could never maintain. Crews reported that the turbines ran smoothly without the violent reciprocating forces of steam pistons or the diesel engine's constant vibration. The cab was quieter, more comfortable, and the controls responded predictably. One engineer, interviewed in a 1963 Railroad Journal, described running a GTL as like sitting in the cockpit of the future. The turbine's whine became distinctive on the mountain grades, a high-pitched scream that announced the presence of Union Pacific's most powerful machines. Performance logs from the late 1950s document what these locomotives accomplished. Trains exceeding 5,000 tons, stretches of 100 miles or more without helper engines, sustained speeds above 40 miles per hour on grades that had slowed big boys to a crawl. The turbines delivered everything Union Pacific had hoped for and more. Yet even as they proved their capabilities day after day across the western deserts and mountain passes, forces beyond the rails were already sealing their fate. The same economic conditions that had made them attractive were shifting beneath the railroad's feet, and the turbine's greatest strength was about to become their fatal weakness. In 1952, when Union Pacific took delivery of its first gas turbine locomotives, Bunker C fuel oil sold for pennies per gallon. Refineries considered it waste material, the heavy residue left after extracting gasoline, diesel, and other valuable products from crude oil. The turbines designed to burn this cheap sludge seemed to offer an unbeatable economic advantage. That assumption would prove catastrophically wrong. The 1960s brought fundamental changes to the petroleum industry. Refineries developed new cracking processes that could break down heavy residual oils into more valuable products. What had been worthless waste became feedstock for other processes. Simultaneously, global demand for petroleum products surged as economies expanded and developing nations industrialized. The price of Bunker C began climbing, slowly at first, then accelerating through the decade. By the late 1960s, the fuel cost advantage had evaporated entirely. The turbines consumed fuel at an astonishing rate, approximately twice as much per horsepower hour as diesel locomotives. When Bunker C was cheap, this inefficiency didn't matter, but as prices climbed, the economics inverted. What had been the turbine's greatest strength became an anchor around Union Pacific's balance sheet. The 1973 oil crisis delivered the final blow. OPEC's embargo sent petroleum prices skyrocketing virtually overnight. Bunker C fuel that had once cost a fraction of diesel's price now matched or exceeded it. The turbines, gulping down thousands of gallons per run, became financial liabilities. Union Pacific's accountants ran the numbers and found an uncomfortable truth. Operating a single GTL now cost more than running two modern diesel-electric units that together could match the turbine's pulling power. Environmental regulations added another burden. The turbines burned dirty, producing thick black smoke that violated increasingly strict air quality standards. While diesel locomotives could be fitted with emissions controls relatively easily, the turbine's design made such modifications expensive and complex. Cities along Union Pacific's routes began complaining about the smoke plumes that marked the turbine's passage. Meanwhile, diesel-electric technology had advanced dramatically. The second and third generation diesels emerging from EMD, General Electric, and ALCO in the late 1960s were more powerful, more reliable, and far more fuel-efficient than their predecessors. A consist of four 3,000 horsepower diesel units could deliver 12,000 horsepower total, while burning less fuel than a single 8,500 horsepower turbine. Union Pacific began retiring the turbines in 1969. By 1970, most were in storage. The last GTL made its final revenue run in December 1969, marking the end of an era that had lasted barely 17 years. The machines that were supposed to replace the big boy and carry railroading into the future were instead scrapped. Their massive bodies cut apart for scrap metal, their turbine engines salvaged or discarded. Those who worked around the Union Pacific turbines never forgot the experience. Unlike the rhythmic symphony of a steam locomotive or the steady diesel rumble, the turbines produced a sound entirely their own, a rising, screaming whine that seemed to tear at the air itself. Veterans described it as standing next to a jet aircraft spooling up for takeoff, a noise that vibrated in your chest and made conversation impossible within 100 yards. The turbine engine itself operated at extreme speeds, its compressor blades spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute, gulping massive quantities of air and fuel. The exhaust, superheated and traveling at tremendous velocity, blasted from stacks mounted high on the locomotive body. When a turbine passed through a station at speed, the noise could rattle windows and set off car alarms long before anyone knew what a car alarm was. But the most memorable characteristic was the smoke. Unlike the white steam from coal-fired boilers or the relatively clean exhaust from diesels, the turbines burning heavy Bunker C oil produced dense, black clouds that could darken the sky. The fuel itself was thick as tar at room temperature, requiring heating systems just to pump it from tender to engine. When burned, it left behind residues that coated everything downwind with a fine, oily film. Track workers learned to recognize when a turbine was scheduled. They'd finish their maintenance and clear the right-of-way well in advance, knowing the noise and smoke would make working conditions unbearable. Towns along the main line received complaints from residents about soot on their homes and cars. Union Pacific tried using cleaner fuels, but the economics that made the turbines viable only worked with the cheapest, dirtiest oil available. Despite these issues, many engineers respected the turbine's raw capability. In a 1968 interview, one veteran engineer admitted, "She was a beast, no question. Loud as hell, dirtier than sin, but when you had 5,000 tons behind you and a grade ahead, you'd take a turbine over anything else on the property. Nothing pulled like those machines when they were running right." The turbine's tenders were equally impressive, massive fuel tanks that could hold up to 7,200 gallons of bunker sea oil and 24,000 gallons of water for cooling systems. Fully loaded, a turbine and tender combination stretched over 160 feet, longer than the big boy itself. The sheer scale of these machines, combined with their distinctive sound and visual signature, should have made them unforgettable. Yet somehow, despite their size and spectacle, despite the noise that announced their presence miles away, the turbines slipped into obscurity. No preservation society saved one for operation. No museum made them centerpieces. The machines simply vanished, leaving barely a trace of their brief dominance on American rails. When Union Pacific began scrapping the turbines in the early 1970s, few voices were raised in protest. Railroad preservation groups, which had fought to save steam locomotives throughout the 1960s, showed little interest in the turbines. The public, which had embraced the big boy as an American icon, barely noticed the turbine's disappearance. It was as if the machines had never existed. Part of this collective amnesia stemmed from Union Pacific's own priorities. The railroad had promoted the big boy relentlessly during the steam era, understanding the value of public relations and corporate image. Photo specials, press releases, and carefully staged publicity events had transformed the big boy into a household name. The turbines received no such treatment. Union Pacific operated the GTELs as working locomotives, nothing more. No special paint schemes adorned them. No publicity campaigns celebrated their power. They were tools purchased to move freight economically, and when they no longer fulfilled that function, they were disposed of like any other obsolete equipment. The railroad saw no reason to preserve them or promote their legacy. The timing worked against them as well. The turbine's operational life coincided with railroading's least romantic period, the 1950s and 1960s, when the industry focused on survival rather than spectacle. Steam locomotives carried nostalgia and historical weight. Diesels, though mundane, were practical and forward-looking. The turbines occupied an awkward middle ground, neither romantic enough to inspire preservation nor practical enough to justify continued operation. Only one complete Union Pacific gas turbine locomotive survives today. Unit number 18, a first-generation GTEL built in 1952, sits in the Illinois Railway Museum. It's intact but inoperable, a static display that few visitors recognize or understand. No restored turbine pulls excursion trains. No model manufacturers produce detailed replicas for collectors. The machines that once produced more horsepower than any other locomotives in American history exist now primarily in faded photographs and aging railroad journals. Compare this to the big boy's legacy. 8 complete examples survive, preserved in museums across the country. Union Pacific's number 4014, restored to operation in 2019, draws massive crowds wherever it runs. Children wear big boy t-shirts. Photographers chase it across state lines. The locomotive that the turbines were meant to replace remains more famous, more beloved, and more present in the public consciousness than the machines that actually succeeded it in service. The turbines failed, not just technically and economically, but culturally. They never captured the imagination. They never became symbols of anything beyond their utilitarian function. And when that function could no longer be justified, they disappeared without ceremony or regret, leaving barely a ripple in the collective memory of American railroading. The story of Union Pacific's gas turbine locomotives is not simply about technological failure. It's about the gap between engineering ambition and economic reality, between what's possible and what's practical. The turbines worked exactly as designed. They produced tremendous power, hauled massive trains, and operated reliably for their intended purpose. Yet they still failed, and their failure reveals uncomfortable truths about innovation and progress. Union Pacific bet on turbine technology because it seemed to solve multiple problems simultaneously. More power than steam, better fuel economy than early diesels, cheaper operating costs than both. On paper, in the laboratories, and during the initial years of service, these assumptions held. The turbines delivered everything promised, but they couldn't adapt when conditions changed. Diesel-electric technology, by contrast, proved remarkably flexible. As emission standards tightened, diesels could be modified. When fuel prices rose, engineers developed more efficient engines. As computer controls became available, diesels integrated them seamlessly. The technology evolved, continuously improving with each generation. The turbines, locked into their fundamental design, couldn't evolve. They were optimized for a specific set of conditions that existed briefly in the 1950s and early 1960s, then vanished. This inflexibility extended beyond engineering. The turbines required specialized infrastructure, fuel heating systems, unique maintenance facilities, crews trained in their particular operation. Once Union Pacific committed to turbine power, switching away meant writing off enormous investments in this supporting ecosystem. The railroad found itself trapped between the sunk costs of the past and the economic realities of the present. Perhaps most tellingly, no other major American railroad adopted gas turbine locomotives on any significant scale. A few experimental units ran elsewhere, but Union Pacific's fleet remained unique. The industry watched Union Pacific's experience and drew their conclusions. When the economics shifted against the turbines, no one else was invested enough to care about their fate. Today, modern diesel-electric locomotives produce 4,400 horsepower or more per unit, approaching the turbine's output while burning a fraction of the fuel and producing minimal emissions. Distributed power systems allow railroads to place locomotives throughout a train, eliminating the need for single massive engines. The future arrived, just not in the form Union Pacific anticipated. The turbines were supposed to replace the big boy and usher in a new era of rail power. Instead, they became a footnote, a curiosity, a cautionary tale about the difference between innovation and lasting change. The big boy lives on in public memory and occasional operation, celebrated and preserved. The turbines, more powerful and more modern, disappeared into scrap yards and obscurity. If the most powerful locomotives ever built on American soil couldn't survive, what does that tell us about the machinery we're building today? Which of our current technologies, celebrated now as revolutionary, will be forgotten relics in 20 years?